Sure. So the first strategy that we have launched with is the Forestry Carbon Sequestration Fund series. And what that is aiming to do is to buy farmland, typically upland farmland in the UK, currently used for livestock agriculture, and convert those farms into commercial forestry, but under the Forestry Stewardship Council guidance. So the ecological sensitivities around commercial timber planting, which we may come on to, are addressed in as much as we can through the FSC guidelines and UK forestry standards. And so creating from that effectively a long-term investment return profile for the underlying pension fund investors who have long-term pension liabilities out in the future.
So these pension funds, they're big investors, very serious business. What is it that attracts them to this? Is it the fact that they want to see the UK having a sustainable timber industry in the future, or is it the carbon offsetting? What's the driver?
Ultimately, it's a hand-in-glove situation. Without a genuine return basis for those pension funds to meet their fiduciary responsibilities to their investors, this won't happen. And so the commercial timber element to this is important. It's what drives the return that as a pension contributor you're going to expect that your manager is delivering. But it's very clear that a lot of investment management houses and consulting actuaries are very focused on finding strategies that deliver the return, but do so in a way that where it can significantly addresses climate change.
Do you have to explain the whole idea of carbon sequestration when you start talking about getting investors on board? How do you get them to go, of course, I need to be there, or are they already there?
I think the ambition and the desire to be in that space, to be doing something that is addressing climate change, they are already there. I think there's been a lot of time spent, and you can see across the investment management universe, this is very topical. The degree to which they understand the detail and how the science, let's say, of how these things work, that's perhaps more patchy. But then these are pretty specialist strategies. So, in anything that you were doing, you would expect to come in and have to explain yourself to some degree, and it's no different here.
Is there a concern over livestock farms turning into these carbon sequestration farms, and they're not necessarily native trees, which has been flagged up by some as a concern? What's the reasoning behind that, and how do you feel personally about doing that?
I come from a rural background, and so I'm very conscious that in moving away from livestock agriculture, my father and grandfather were livestock auctioneers, and there's an element of change that is going to happen that, it is sad. And my home area is also a big coal mining area. I remember in my youth, the move away from coal was also painful. And you wouldn't wish it on people, but then again, you can't stand in the way of what is an inevitable change, is my view. And so we need to address that as sensitively as we can. Clearly, there are employment opportunities within the forestry sector as well, but it will bring change. Are the two mutually exclusive? No, not at all. We're still going to have upland farms. There will just be less of them and less acreage, I suspect. So the social consideration is not lost on us. To take in a 1,000-acre hill farm where you've got a farmer who's heading into his 70s, his children aren't interested in following on. This is a very familiar story. Farming is what he knows, what he loves, but the kids don't want to know that dad is out on the top of the hill on a quad bike in a driving blizzard, in a dangerous situation. They would far rather that perhaps he stayed in the house, had 100 or 200 acres around the house, some pedigree livestock that he can work with, and still have a dignified retirement. And in the meantime, unlock 1,000 acres of planting ground, which is very valuable, to fund his retirement. The ecological issues around non-native tree species, I think, is It is it's a sensitive area in as much as I think a lot of the lay folk looking at the idea of planting all of these millions of trees would aspire to a large area of native woodland that is ecologically ideal, to try and recreate what the UK looked like in its pre-Neolithic state. And yeah, I would share that dream, but the main motivation here is sequestering carbon. And as an example, a commercial Sitka spruce plant will draw in somewhere between 6 and 10 times as much carbon in a day as a native planted, willow or birch. And so we've got to look at the results that we can achieve in actually getting carbon out of the atmosphere using these trees. And so that non-native species is much more efficient at capturing carbon, much more efficient. And in addition to that, I come to this from a real estate background, a history in real estate development, and probably have been responsible or stood alongside as we've poured millions of tons of concrete and tons of steel, all of which are enormously polluting from a carbon dioxide perspective. And the generations that follow us will not build in concrete and steel. 30 years from now, our kids' generation are going to want to have timber building products that ultimately capture and lock up that carbon going forward. So if you think in the context of the native woodland versus a commercial timber operation, once that native woodland gets to its maturity, it's a zero-sum game in terms of future carbon capture. The trees will die ultimately and fall away and release their carbon, and they're no longer a sink for carbon in that respect. With commercial timber, it is ecologically undoubtedly a less attractive environment that we create within those coops of commercial trees, and I would recognize that front and center. But as we harvest those trees and they go into the mill and are cut down for that crucial building product, that then clears the site and we start all over again with a whole new cycle of carbon sequestration. And so by using the commercial route, we have a long-term sustainable means of both creating building products, but also repeating that cycle of carbon sequestration, which you can't do with native woodland.
Now, you mentioned that your first fund has already been sorted. You're already moved on to the second. What next for True North? Where are you going to go next?
On a business level, we're interested in other parallel strategies that work alongside this initiative. We're looking at the moment at a industrial development concept that would be utilizing timber frames, so glue laminates, timber frame structures in place of steel. Looking to utilize all of the roof space that you see in large industrial estates for solar, and potentially down the line using that for green hydrogen harvesting. If you have a distribution business that's operating out of a light industrial estate, the wagons, the lorries that you're using today running on diesel in 10 or 20 years will be running, I suspect, on hydrogen. And green hydrogen is more expensive than blue hydrogen, the stuff extracted from natural gas. But that is really down to the cost of the infrastructure. And ultimately, if we can do that at scale, you can reduce the unit cost of the hydrogen that you're producing on site there to fuel your trucks. And the building itself is built in timber, not steel, which potentially, I would say strongly is the future. That's the sort of example, I think, of the strategies that we're looking to roll out, and potentially globalizing the reforestation concept. That's a big step for us. Finding local partners will be a challenge in some of the geographies that we need to really make a difference. But there are well-documented cases of deforestation for animal production in the Amazon basin, where what we're doing at the minute could be translated. Lots of exciting things to look to the future.